Recording this. So welcome to the mid-session update with our Southwestern Vermont Delegation, both our senators and our representatives throughout the county. This has always become a great, really eclectic group over the last couple of years as the chamber has expanded to represent the full region and the businesses and nonprofits that represent that region. What we've been able to do is to get our friends from the North Shire onto these calls, which has always been really beneficial and really start to move together as a county when we look at state matters. So I really appreciate both our South Shire representatives and our North Shire representatives hopping on today. Of course, it's a little bit easier on Zoom, but like I said, for some of you when you first hopped on, our Eric and my real hope is to either when the session ends or as we prepare for the next one in the fall, really have all of you together. That just has really been a great experience, and maybe we'll even do some breakfast or lunch around that too. So without further ado, the format for today is we'll go around, we'll start with our senators, go to our representatives. I'll call on you, just introduce yourself, what you, who you represent in terms of a county or a district, and what maybe one or two things you've been working on or concerns or that you're watching for our members. We'll go around the room that way with our elected officials. And then we'll open it up to just general Q&A, introduce yourself, where you're calling in from, where you're working from, and if you have a question for any of our legislators. So we'll start with Senator Sears, you, and then we'll go to Senator Campion, and then we'll pick up with representatives.
Sounds great, Matt. Thank you, and thank you all for joining and inviting us. I chair the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I'm also a member of the Senate Appropriations Committee, and I can only say on the Appropriations Committee, this has been one of those surprising times in history when we actually have more money to spend. And because of the federal programs, and we're really going through that. What are priorities for Vermonters and what is the best use of those funds? And it's not as easy as it sounds. But there are two major themes. One is workforce development, and also how do we get people to work, particularly in social services, our mental health centers. The vacancy rates are just enormous throughout that sector. And so in the Budget Adjustment Act, we put aside $60 million for both recruitment and retention for designated agencies like United Counseling Service, home health programs that visiting nurses run. Those types of programs really are short-staffed, and that's impacting a lot of different areas of government. We're also obviously putting a lot of money into housing, broadband expansion, and those types of as the governor said, this is a transformative period. So we are really looking at various needs. On the Senate Judiciary Committee, we've focused on several major bills. One that we've already passed over the House is medical monitoring, and that's based upon the lawsuit here in Bennington that was just settled between St. Gobain and Sullivan et al. And it affects everyone who lives in the area of contamination or has businesses or whatever in that area. We also did a bill on raise the age, which we made some adjustments based upon some of the experiences here in Bennington with very serious offenders who were young, between the ages of 18 and 16. And I'm happy to get into that. We also did a bill on criminal threatening, which actually, in terms of the chamber, does have an interesting twist in it, and that is that if you're forced to follow a state mandate for masks, for example, in your store or any executive order, this would allow you to, if you're threatened with serious bodily injury or death, that's a criminal act for enforcing those laws or executive orders. Another interesting bill that we didn't move forward on, but I think is important is on shoplifting and the aggregate value we've seen in other states and somewhat in Chittenden County, where groups of individuals will go into a store and organize shoplifting. And this bill would have aggravated the value. What we found as we looked into it, our current laws are already established, fairly well established. And it's a matter of making sure our state's attorneys prosecute those shoplifting cases when they're large amounts, particularly, and they're talking in the thousands in Chittenden County right now. And I think we've all seen the stores broken into, jewelry stolen, etc. So that bill didn't go anywhere, but it's important to note, I don't think many people realize, you as a shop owner have the right to detain somebody for a reasonable amount of time in order to get the police to come. So you don't have to let them go drive off. Whatever, you can detain them. Obviously that can be dangerous, but you have to use your own judgment. I don't think people realize that was already on the books. And I would urge you all to have that conversation with Erica Mathage here in Bennington to make sure that she is prosecuting that type of crime. That pretty well, I mean, we have a number of other bills, perhaps the most controversial is qualified immunity. Happy to get into any of those that folks have questions about.
Great, thanks, Senator Sears. We'll go over to you, Senator Campion, on the phone.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate being here. So I chair Senate Education in the afternoon, and in the morning I serve on Natural Resources and Energy. On the Natural Resources and Energy front, we've been working on a housing bill with the Economic Development Committee. We all know the housing shortage is a serious one. It's it's tough to come out of college, tough to be paying off student loans, start a family, and move into what we're calling the lost middle, middle income, middle class housing. And so we're working to remove a lot of the Act 250 restrictions that would be used with ARPA dollars to build these kinds of housing, different housing for middle and working class Vermonters. So that hopefully will be on the floor, soon after we get back. Somewhat related to that bill is a forestry bill. Many Vermonters, we drive around, I'm on my way now to Rutland looking at all the beautiful forests on the way up, but we are losing roughly, according to the Department of Forestry, 11,000 acres a year. And we need to make sure that we protect our forests. We know that it's the right thing to do for climate and habitat, but also for those of us who ski and enjoy the outdoors and hunt, whatever you might do, it's also really important for economic development. On the education front, we have been monitoring closely what's happening in our schools with COVID. As I think everybody knows, there has been a tremendous amount of learning loss that's happened over the past few years. I may have shared this story with some of you, but a colleague of ours who often talks about her grandson who started kindergarten during COVID and now is in second grade. We recognize there's a lot of not only learning loss, but social, emotional development that students lost and are struggling with. So we're working with the administration to put together a recovery plan that should come out in the next month that incorporates a number of different investments, certainly a number in social emotional health, but also after school programs. You all may recall we made a big investment last year in after school and summer programs. We hope to continue to do that work this year. I think a couple of other big things coming out of education. You're watching the Supreme Court decisions and that they're taking, or not decisions, but what they've taken up around church and state issues in education. And even what our own Supreme Court past decade has decided, that public dollars can go to religious schools in sending districts. And so what we're working to do is to put some guidelines around how those dollars would flow. These are, for example, in choice districts. If you live in a school that in a district like maybe North Bennington, kindergarten through sixth grade, or in parts of Manchester, Dorset, when you're sending a child to school, you can send your child to a religious institution. And basically what the courts are saying is you can do this as long as the state puts around guidelines on how those dollars are used. In other words, trying to keep them out of religious worship, etc. So we've put together a bill that we passed out last week that works with the State Board of Education, an approval process that schools will need to go through if you want to accept students who, again, would bring public dollars to religious institutions. So that's an important bill, one that we hope will clear the Senate and make its way to the House. The other thing that I'd say that we continue to work on is, I think it was very transformative last year, our literacy program that we put forward. And we know that reading levels in a lot of schools, I think it's roughly 40% of Vermont kids aren't reading at grade level by the time they reach third grade. That's a big issue and one that we continue to work on and address. It's hard to catch up, and then you put on top of that the learning loss, etc., from COVID, makes for a really serious situation that can impact, of course,
Morning, Rachel.
workforce, etc. I think Rachel just arrived. And I think that is really, just looking at my list here. Oh, the final thing I would say I don't think, we've been working closely with with Mark Levine and Dan French around what school will look like in the fall around vaccination requirements. The agency, of course, is considering mandatory vaccinations for COVID, but there's no decision on that yet. I also have a bill in that would remove the religious exemption for vaccinations. I don't believe Health and Welfare is going to take that up. I do hope we get to the point where all students would be required to be vaccinated to enter our public schools, but we'll see if that happens this year or in the future. So those are a few things, and like I said, I'm on my way to Rutland for a meeting, but I'll be listening in and hopefully available for questions. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Senator Campion. We'll head right over to Representative Nigro, and based on my screen, I'll go down, but we'll start with you, Mike.
Sounds good. Good morning. Mike Nigro, District 2-2, and I sit on House Commerce and Economic Development Committee. So our biggest focus this session has been on workforce and the workforce crisis, and a lot of the focus areas that Senator Sears was talking about spending money. We've been talking a lot about the details in terms of programs and ways we can move the needle, particularly in some of our most critical sectors. So H703 is a very large workforce related bill that we're spending time on, actually wrapping up in the next week. And the section of that bill myself, I've personally been most involved on and working on is the healthcare workforce. So we've looked a lot at increasing our nurse education and training pipeline. So we kind of have these two approaches for trying to get the number of nurses we need, attracting them to the state, and then training and educating within the state. And we've really focused more on the pipeline piece of that. Part of the reason for that is every state is trying to attract nurses. Every state is creating incentives to attract nurses, and it's turned into a little bit of a incentives arms race. Which probably is unlikely that Vermont is the state that will win that arms race. So we still have some incentives, but I think we're focused much more on our pipeline. So we've been working on some creative ways to improve the pay scale for nurse instructors at preceptors in our colleges. We found that this position is significantly underpaid for a variety of reasons. And it's one of the real roadblocks to increasing our capacity to educate nurses in the state. We are looking to create a pool of funds for colleges to expand their nursing program. We really went to each of the colleges in the state and said, what would it take for you to double the number of nurses you can graduate each year? We're looking at money for hospitals to create or expand their partnerships with colleges. And there's a couple different models for that throughout the state. And I have to at least make a quick note that taking testimony from different hospitals and providers throughout the state really drove home how impressed I am by our own hospital. I think SVMC, they have a partnership with Castleton. I think they're doing a lot right around workforce right now. And again, just I think the way they've weathered the storm of the last few years, as challenging as it's been, I think they're in much better shape than other hospitals in the state. We've also think it's important to refund a lot of the scholarship programs for nursing. I think everybody agrees with that. That was in the governor's proposal as well. We had created a lot of scholarships for nursing last year and plan to refund those this year. Also branch off into the mental health sector as well, as again, Senator Sears mentioned, an area of critical need. Scholarships, loan repayments for mental health care workers, and again, looking at some of the funding model and amounts in mental health. Not the exciting stuff, but still important. We're looking for a really major investment in our Department of Labor's computer system that they manage unemployment and a lot of their services. It is extremely antiquated, a coding language from the late 70s. And it's unfortunately going to take a significant investment, but it's an important investment. And now is the time we're able to make it. And again, I'll leave on one final section, even though this bill has a lot more. I could go on forever on this bill because we have so much, but we've been looking a lot at our education for trades and technical career education. So career and tech centers like Southwest Tech, looking around funding models for that. Representative James actually has worked a lot on that, so I won't go too deep into that. As well as an exciting new construction building program that would put up funds that would allow CTEs to purchase dilapidated buildings in town, rehab them, giving education on construction skills to the student, and then sell those houses and continue the program, in a self-sustaining manner. So really exciting proposal. So like I said, I'll leave it there.
I laugh at that, Representative Nigro, because I believe the chamber building was built by the CDC back in the 1980s.
Is that right?
And I think it's showing some of its age recently. Erica, I'm sure, is laughing at that too. But yeah, great program, very exciting. Next up, we're going to go to Representative James up in Manchester. Good morning, Representative.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. And it's actually great to hear from everybody else first and hear about how all the work that we're all doing kind of syncs up and works together. It's kind of exciting. So everybody's already talked quite a bit about housing and workforce and childcare, another top priority. As Senator Sears mentioned, we have a lot of money coming that's going to be infused into those three areas in the FY22 Budget Adjustment Act, which includes a major investment in housing, major investments in workforce retention bonuses, and that includes $6 million in childcare workforce retention bonuses. In terms of housing, I just wanted to apologize for my district mate, Seth Bongartz. He really wanted to be here this morning, but Seth and I are on our local housing committee, and we had a meeting this morning, and we decided to divide and conquer. So Seth sends his regrets. Seth and I, as I think most folks know, hosted a housing summit in Arlington in October, and the ideas and concepts from that summit became a bill that we put quite a bit of time into over the summer and fall, H511. And I believe that H511 is a part of the conversations on the Senate side, that the Senate's going to be advancing a major housing bill that I think Brian talked about. And so H511 basically would make it easier to build housing in our town centers. And so that bill is may not may not advance on its own as a standalone, but is getting, I believe, either swept into the bill on the House side or will become a factor on the Senate side, or will become a factor on the House side. So in the Education Committee this year, we've been focusing a lot on workforce pipeline issues. I introduced a bill, H456, that will set strategic goals and objectives into statute for the Vermont state colleges, which was one of the key recommendations of the Select Committee on the Future of Public Higher Ed in Vermont. And that bill also has a major focus on affordability for the Vermont state colleges. And that passed the House and just last week, and we'll be heading over to the Senate for consideration in the second half of the session. And then two of the bills I introduced are getting rolled into the big workforce bill, as Rep. Nigro mentioned. So that's exciting. I introduced a bill to really try to wrap up the conversations about how we fund CTE education in our state. CTE, the current system is widely seen as a barrier to enrollment, and we really need to fix that. And so H483, which has become a part of the workforce bill, would basically task the Agency of Education with developing a proposal and a very concrete implementation plan that it can deliver to the legislature, so we can get that system funded and governed in a way that really builds our workforce pipeline. And then finally, a bill I introduced, H377, also moved into the workforce bill. And that bill focuses on post-secondary attainment. Vermont has a goal that was set in statute in 2019, I think, or 2018, that by 2025, 70% of all Vermonters, of all working age Vermonters, would hold a credential of value. Right now, we're about at 53%, so we've got some work to do. And this section of the bill would create a public-private partnership with Advance Vermont to focus on the really good work it's doing to create a statewide, easy to use credential registry, a database basically, where Vermonters could go and research all kinds of post-secondary credentials, whether that's a degree or an apprenticeship. And if anybody is curious, that work is well underway at myfuturevt.org. It's a great project, and I think that's it from me for now.
Great, thank you, Representative James. Let's see here. Next up, we have Representative Corcoran from Bennington.
Thanks, Matt. For those who don't know me, I'm Tim Corcoran, and I represent Bennington District 2-1, and I sit on the Transportation Committee. Unlike a lot of the other committees, the Transportation Committee typically deals with two bills. We usually have a miscellaneous DMV bill, and then obviously our transportation bill, and that takes up the majority of our time on our committee. With that, currently we're wrapping up our transportation bill, and the time I've been on the committee, this is by and large the biggest transportation budget that I've worked on. It's a little over $843 million dollars, which is expansive. Usually it's and I think when I first started it was around, I don't know, 400 or 500 million. So we've come a long way, and the reason why it's obviously where it's ramped up is the federal dollars that we've been receiving over the years, and this one's no different. The latest reauthorization from Congress pumped in, I think it was $1.6 billion over 5 years, and that's $500 million more than the last reauthorization. So it's good and bad, and that leads me to my next point, is that when you receive federal dollars, you need to match it with state dollars, and that's typically on an 80-20 match. And unfortunately, with our declining gas revenues, it's becoming quite apparent that we can't rely on the gas tax. So as a committee, we're trying to figure out how to offset that declining gas revenue. Because we've had projections over the next 3 or 4 years where the transportation is going to be in a hole. We're looking at $40 million up to $60 million hole next year in order to maximize our federal dollar. So, we have a lot of tough decisions of where we're going to go as a committee to make that up. It's it's not going to be easy. One of the things that we're starting to look at is obviously charging electricity for your electric vehicles, trying to recoup some money there for the loss of gas revenue, but there's just not enough EVs to make up that difference of money. But one thing I think might be getting some traction is miles traveled, and I think that's I'm not sure how many years out that's going to take to get there, but I think one of the mindset is when you get your car inspected, because you're going to have your miles based on that. So it's not like you'll have a tracking device, but when you get your car inspected, they'll be able to jot down your mileage and you'll pay X amount. But so outside of the funding aspect, just to give you a couple highlights of what's in the T bill is, like I said, it's $843 million. The paving budget is over $158 million. Again, that's come a long way. When I first started, it was 25 million. Now we're up to $158 million. So we're going to be doing a lot of paving this summer, which is a good thing. Our total highway programs are totaling at $81.6 million, which is obviously good for the towns. And another obviously push for the climate and an initiative on our committee is electric vehicles. We're pumping millions of dollars into incentives for buying electric vehicles. There's quite a few programs out there, but there's going to be $12 million for incentives for purchasing electric vehicles. There's going to be an additional $3 million for Replace Your Ride program. And this program, I don't think it's quite up off the ground yet, but hopefully it will be by this summer, is where if you have a low efficient vehicle miles traveled, you'll be able to trade in your car and purchase not necessarily an EV, but a car that gets high mileage. So that's going to be a new program out there. And there's a couple $1 million for electric bicycles and to purchase electric all-terrain vehicles. So there's like I said, and I forgot to mention charging station. That's another issue that a lot of people have anxiety about purchasing electric vehicles is, I don't want to, be stranded out in the middle of nowhere without the ability to charge up one's car. So we've have a little over $19 million in charging stations that are going to be spread out through the state of Vermont. So hopefully that will go a long ways. And another, I think it's an interesting pilot program that we have in Montpelier is called microtransit, and it's through public transit, and it's basically it's like Uber, and it's so one can call up if they have if they want to go anywhere, but we're looking towards the elderly and trying to get to appointments, and this is another avenue trying to tackle the lack of transportation. So there's a pilot program in Montpelier to hopefully that will expand over the next 5 years, because we're hoping to get this pilot program in other communities, hopefully up to 12 communities over the next 5 years. Like I said, transportation, we just, that's, we have a couple bills. So those are, what we're working on. We'll have this probably pass out of our committee probably the week after we get back from town meeting. And just a couple other bills that aren't in my committee, but just, for just talk about is, I think it was, 3 or 4 weeks ago, and maybe Representative Durfee will talk about this, but the child tax credit bill, this was a tax relief program that we passed, and it's similar to the what the feds had last summer. And basically, if you have a kid under six or younger, you'll be able to get a $1,200 tax credit. Going to be roughly $50 million to implement, and I'm sure this bill is going to evolve over the process. I think it's currently in the Senate right now. I know the governor, his was a little bit more expansive. It went outside of or went beyond the child tax credit. I think he had some issue or exemptions for military income and nurse credits. So there was a lot of different issues that I'm sure will get talked about as this bill expands. And just one last note that I had was just redistricting. That's sort of like a huge issue for the Committee of Government Operations, and they've been working on that all this biennium. And with Bennington, our numbers were down a little bit, so there was a couple different scenarios where it wasn't looking too good for Bennington, but they settled on redrawing the lines where basically District 2-2 is going to expand into Pownell a little bit. They're going to pick up basically 550 people in Pownell, but outside of that, Bennington is going to remain whole and continue to have 4 representatives, which is a good thing, because we were sort of potentially we could have lost a rep, and it doesn't look like that's going to happen. So with that, I'll pass it along to the next representative. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Tim. And that last part's helpful to understand and know that we still have all of you.
Yeah.
So that's helpful. Okay, so we're going to go over to Representative Morrissey on the phone.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining. And for full disclosure, I'm also a board member for the Southwestern Chamber of Commerce. So my committee is House Institutions and Corrections, and we are a money committee, very much like transportation is. We deal a great deal with the Appropriations Committee and with Judiciary in regards to the correctional issues. My committee covers a whole gambit of issues, from bricks and mortar of state-owned properties and maintaining them, or building new buildings to meet the needs of our state, whether it's a secure residential that helps for folks who are having mental health issues, or we also, with our public safety projects across the state, but we also deal with housing and conservation. We provide a considerable amount of money to different projects, and we also deal a great deal with water quality, and also with our forests and the Forest Parks and Recreation, which is a big draw to our state. And so we put a considerable amount of money into that as well. We also work with the University of Vermont and Vermont State Colleges. This year, as everyone has indicated, because of the ARPA funding, we have a focus on, what I would consider are many of the priorities within our even budgets that we're dealing with. And that, of course, is clean water. And we deal a great deal with those types of projects within our communities and elsewhere. Our budget this year is around $129 million, and then with the ARPA funding, the key pieces that we're working on, along with other committees, is the broadband and internet connection, and our piece of it is trying to find areas that we can improve upon. I know we discussed last week where some towers may be put, and that can be a very controversial issue because many folks don't want it near their properties or that. So that became a very interesting discussion, but we are working on all of those pieces as well. I'm trying to think with, as I said, we also with institutions and corrections, the corrections end of it, we have been working on a number of pieces that help as folks are transitioning out of a correctional facility. And have worked hard, and we actually 2 years ago put funding in for programs to happen within the corrections. So that there would be hopefully very smooth and transitional pieces in place for those coming out of corrections, that they would have possibly a certificate for a particular job that they could go into. We had come before us the construction community, and they were wanting to be able to provide actual schooling and on-hands work initiatives for someone leaving corrections to be able to have that certificate so that they could go to possibly work in construction or that. And it could be a win-win situation because our workforce in the construction, as many other aspects of businesses, need folks who are prepared and ready to come into the workforce, that this could be a win-win. Construction workers, like a number of other jobs throughout the state, have had a decline of people going into a particular business like that or work initiative. So unfortunately, though, as we started that program, COVID was just starting. So we're trying to ramp up those discussions now that hopefully we're coming to the end of it of COVID, and that we'll see some of those pieces put into place that could help. And there were other, obviously, initiatives as well, such as within culinary. I know we talked about also folks looking to be ready and certified with a CDL license, but there are some complexities a little bit around that. But we kind of hit a number of gambits of across the board with initiatives that our committee work on. It's never dull, and we work with many of the other committees on different levels. So I will leave it at that.
Great, thank you, Representative Morrissey. Thanks for calling in today. The last two I have on my list we'll go with Representative Durfee from Shasta, and then over to Representative Whitman to finish us out.
Thank you, Matt. Good morning. Nice to see everybody. I'm David Durfee. I represent Shaftesbury, part of Sunderland, and Glastonbury. Sorry, I just wanted to adjust my screen there so I can see all your faces. And I sit on the Ways and Means Committee, which is the committee that deals with taxes and other revenue to the state. As a couple of people have mentioned, we are cash flush at the moment. It's really extraordinary, and we throw around numbers that even I think those of us who are deep into it have trouble getting our heads around sometime. But we've never been in a situation where there is so much money to be decided how to be spent. And a lot of it is one-time money that's come from the federal government through programs that we've all been talking about this morning, ARPA and the infrastructure plan. But we also have what appears to be a shift in ongoing revenue coming in through income taxes, sales taxes, a shift upward, so that it looks like on an ongoing basis we will have larger budgets. And the one exception I'll mention is the transportation fund and the gasoline tax that Tim mentioned. That's been down, but everything else is up. So we've got a large surplus in the general fund, and we've just finished the work on the budget adjustment. Senator Sears mentioned that it's on the order of $360 million, I think. And again, that number is not necessarily meaningful unless you have some context. But in a normal, I would say in a typical year, we come into sort of the midpoint of the fiscal year with a deficit, and we're trying to figure out how do we cover these additional expenses that we've incurred, or that we know we're going to incur through various programs. And this year we're not in that situation at all. So everyone, of course, is pleased that we have these extra funds and trying to figure out where's the best way to use them. And normally that's not the job of the Ways and Means Committee, because our responsibility is looking at where does the money come from. So one of the things that we did do, and Tim mentioned this as well, is propose a child tax credit, which would be a brand new credit for Vermont, but not a new concept. There's a federal tax credit, and anyone who has kids under 18 has benefited from that, and it was expanded over the past 12 months. There was hope that expansion would continue going forward federally, but so far it hasn't, and so it abruptly ended in December. So the Vermont program would sort of pick up where that left off. It would be available to parents and guardians of children aged 6 and under, practically to every family in Vermont. It would cut off at $200,000, and there are very relatively few children in Vermont with households at that income level. So it would be available to basically everybody. It would be refundable. A refundable credit means that if your tax liability goes to zero, you would actually get a payment. And this is a concept that exists in the tax code, so it's not a brand new thing. Could be used for anything, not necessarily for childcare expenses, but it could be used for childcare expenses. It had tripartisan support in the House, and it passed out I think 102 votes in favor, and it's over in the Senate now. So we're very hopeful that it will move ahead and kick in later this year. A couple of the tax-related things. I know Kathleen mentioned that Seth wasn't here, and I did want to mention a bill that he helped shepherd through Natural Resources, the committee that he sits on, and then came to Ways and Means for us to look at. And it involves a concept that Senator Campion brought up earlier, which is the health of our forests. We have in existing law an exemption for property taxes for property owners who farm their land or who log their land. So the agriculture and forestry exemptions. And this bill, which is will be passed out on a week from today or a week from tomorrow when we get back to the House, would create a new category for old growth forest, essentially, or forest that's going to be left to eventually evolve into an old growth stage. It's desirable from the standpoint of biodiversity and for carbon sequestration. And right now, there's no incentive at all for landowners to let their land essentially sit. It does have to be managed. It wouldn't be just letting it sit. You would have to have a plan, but it's going to be modest as it rolls out at first. It's not going to be all land. There's special criteria of the forest land that would have to be met. But I think it's very promising. So that, as I said, we passed out next week and then over to the Senate. And then just one more bill I'll mention that came through Ways and Means. It was actually one that I was personally very, very interested in, and I think other folks would be too. It creates a way for out-of-state mental health and other providers to provide services through telehealth to Vermont residents. So right now, we've got a real crunch, as many universities do, with workforce for mental health counselors. And it's been particularly acute on college campuses, I know. And one way to help relieve that stress is to allow students on college campuses to work with, if they had a provider in their home state before they came to school. And if that provider is out of state right now and doesn't hold a Vermont license, they can't legally meet to provide counseling services over the internet. We have an exemption temporarily in place because of the pandemic that expires at the end of March. So I had a constituent come to me a little over a year ago, pointing out the problem and suggesting that we could come up with a remedy in the legislature. So I put a bill in a year ago with the help of that constituent, and it turned into a study group that met all summer and fall, because this turns out not as easy a situation, not as easy a problem to solve as you might think. They came up with a couple of recommendations, and one of them was a bill that resulted in a bill, H655, that we passed out, the House passed out this week. And it will create a couple of new categories for licensing for not just mental health, but any medical practitioner, to allow people who are out of state to be registered so that they can meet with their patients, do it completely above board, provide some revenue to the state. The state will be able to monitor and make sure that patients are being taken care of in a safe manner. So definitely a good step forward, and I think a good case study too of the how here in Vermont grassroots politics works, and everybody can get involved and see some results. I'll just close by saying, because I don't think anybody's mentioned, that the House is actually meeting in person and has been since the middle of January. We're not in Montpelier today. We're off because of town meeting. We're all back home meeting with you and other constituents, but it's been good to be back in person. And I know the Senate is, well, I don't know for sure, but I believe the Senate is also planning to come back next week. And we'll be sorry that we can't sort of spread out into the Senate committee rooms, which we've been enjoying an unusual perk of doing for the past couple of months. That's it for me.
Great, thank you, Representative Durfee. And then last but not least, we will head over to Representative Whitman, and then have your questions ready. We'll go around and we'll try and conclude in the next half an hour, 40 minutes, depending on how questions go. But Representative Whitman, finish us out.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Matt. Really great to see everybody and Thanks everybody for taking the time out of your mornings to be here. I think everybody being engaged is so important for all of us to do our jobs well. So look forward to hearing your questions once we wrap up here. To introduce myself, I'm Dane Whitman. I represent Bennington District 2-1, which is North Bennington and the west side of Bennington. And this is my second year at the job. And I just want to say, feel the need to say just how much of an honor this has been doing this work, and just, you know, hearing all the work of my colleagues this morning. I'm really just, yeah, really impressed by the work that the legislature has been doing over these 2 really critical years. So again, thank you all for, you know, supporting us in this work. I am going to touch on a few things. My committee is the Human Services Committee. And for those of you who don't know, the jurisdiction of that is basically public health, social and economic services. So basically anti-poverty work, childcare, older Vermonters and people with disabilities, substance use, toxins in consumer products, and more. But that's basically, we like to call it the People Committee. So just to get a sense of sort of what I've been working with. And I'm going to really give 2 big kind of bucket updates for now, and happy to kind of answer any questions if I can. But looking at substance use statewide and the work that we're doing to address that, and housing insecurity and homelessness. So to start with work of substance use, as I'm sure all of you know, this is something that's been impacting the nation. Sadly, I'm sure that it's something that has impacted all of us, whether it's a family or a friend that we know. But basically, we know that in Vermont, fatal overdose from substance use, mostly opioids, has increased on record-breaking levels, especially over the course of the pandemic. Our latest numbers show that almost 200 people have died in the year 2021 from fatal overdose, including, and almost all of them include fentanyl, which is a synthetic opioid that's often mixed in unknowingly with heroin, so that people will be taking a stronger dose than what they're aware of. Now, in response to this, we have proposed in our committee over $10 million in ongoing investments to address this, really looking across the continuum from substance use prevention, which is basically looking at school programs, building youth resilience, mentorship programs, education, and really too, you know, the best prevention is ensuring that somebody has their basic needs met, especially in those early stages of child development and throughout their life. We're also looking at treatment, making sure that treatment for people is accessible if they're ready to go with treatment, that there aren't unnecessary barriers or loopholes or hoops that people need to jump through in order to get access to treatment when they're ready. Another component is supporting our recovery work across the state. So our recovery centers, a lot of people know Turning Point in Bennington as one of them, are really doing a lot of the on the ground work, working with people through their recovery. And an initiative that I'm really excited about this year is looking for employment supports for people in recovery. We know that while there's a workforce crisis statewide and there's need of people to be able to enter the workforce, we also know that employment is one of the best outcomes for somebody's long-term recovery. We've received testimony that it's actually can be very beneficial to somebody's path. So looking at investments throughout the state to ensure that within each recovery center, there is a designated person that's going to be there to provide them support in finding employment, getting retention. We know that there are particular barriers that somebody in recovery may experience, whether it's a criminal record or the stigma of their substance use. And so a lot of things like that. So really would be excited to hear anybody's feedback on the call. I see Wendy Callert's here, and we've been working really closely with Voc Rehab and those folks to find a solution that works for everybody. Another thing on the substance use side of things is just as an update. Many of you might have heard in the news that the big opioid settlement has been reached nationwide, and Vermont will be receiving, we're estimating about $60 million through that, which will be designated. There are some details to it, but basically what we're doing as a committee right now is setting up a group, a panel, an advisory committee of stakeholders throughout the state, as well as entities from municipalities to discuss how those funds will be spent. There are some pretty, there are guardrails as far as it needs to be spent on, addressing the opioid crisis that we're seeing, but that's one thing that we're working on. To kind of switch gears into housing insecurity, homelessness. I'm sure a lot of you have maybe heard some of the news over the last year or two regarding the state of homelessness in Vermont since the start of the pandemic. We've seen a lot of people statewide being evicted for various reasons, including no cause evictions are on the rise. And we know that, from the start, a lot of people found themselves in emergency housing, and essentially the main setup beyond our sorts of shelters that are run by places like the Coalition for the Homeless is hotels and motels are basically providing emergency shelter in collaboration with the state. And right now in Bennington County, we really have an unsettling amount of households. This may not be the latest number, but last I checked a few months ago, it was over 60 children living in motels under emergency housing, and over 160 households as a whole. So really of concern, and something that we want to pay attention to see how we can create a transition for these families to ideally move to permanent housing as far as they're available, find better homes. And so as an update, some of you may have heard that right now the program is being funded through FEMA dollars federally, and those were actually initially set to end March 1st, which would have been tomorrow. That has been extended another month. And my understanding is that the budget adjustment that we're working on may actually extend that out to June. Just since we know that we still have a shortage of housing, we have a shortage of rentals, and if there's no alternative for somebody to go, we want to make sure that they at least keep a roof over their heads. But as kind of the long-term view, to provide an update, we're looking at the state has received a large amount of federal dollars in rental assistance. And we are growing more and more confidence that some of these rental assistance dollars that we've received, actually more than we could ever spend on your typical renter situation, may be used for people living in emergency shelter. And that could be a solution up to 18 months for people within emergency shelter to, they'd need to continue to reapply, and there are some logistical things that we're working out, but this could really be, give us some breathing room. And as we know, the ideal outcome for this is that we use this time to construct and develop affordable housing. And so that people do have somewhere to go. And so we, I believe, have offered over $100 million over the past few years to look at affordable housing development through the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And so I think that it's just really incumbent on us if we're going to find solutions to these problems, that when these projects are proposed in our community, that we see this value that they can really have for our neighbors. Also, just one last thing that I'll mention is that for a lot of Vermonters and people in Bennington, we know that they struggle with chronic homelessness. Some of them may have, mental health condition that makes it difficult for them to maintain stable housing. So one thing that we've advocated for actually as a delegation has been to bring housing first supports to Bennington County. So essentially what that would mean is once somebody, if somebody's dealing with chronic homelessness, that they could be connected to a caseworker essentially that would be able to help place them into housing. And then once that person is placed into housing, to provide wraparound services as far as mental health, economic services, other kinds of counseling, and things like that. Basically so that it really supports people being able to maintain their housing situation, and in the long run, really hoping to offset some of the costs that we may be experiencing with visits to the emergency room, or interactions with public safety, or even being put into residential treatment for psychiatric care, or so really just hoping to support that stability for folks in the long term. So those are kind of my my main highlights right now, and yeah, just look forward to hearing from everybody. So thank you again.
Great, thank you, Representative Whitman. So there's a lot there, and I think before we begin, I just want to say on behalf of the chamber, and I think on behalf of our business community, and even our nonprofits, and just our communities in general, a round of applause to all of you throughout the pandemic. I know there were some hairier days in the beginning, and I'm looking at some around the computer screen when we would hop on and just kind of scratch our head and try and figure out how to get through the storm, all the way up to, as you've all indicated, the massive amount of money, and even how that kind of creates its new type of headache that we never thought it would, because we've never seen that much money. But you still have to have wisdom and thought and all of the constituents in mind every time you're looking at those dollars. And so I know you guys have been putting in a massive amount of work and doing it all remotely, and then traveling and all that kind of stuff. So just thank you on behalf of everybody on this call and our membership as well. But before we close out, I do want to give people on the call, you've all sat patiently and learned a lot from our senators and representatives. You must have questions at this point. So I do want to open it up to our members, and just introduce yourself, where you work, and then state your question. And Chris Bates, you already have your hand up. Thank you, buddy, for being a great participant in kicking us off. Introduce yourself and then your question.
Oh, there we go. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yep.
Hi, Chris Bates, Bennington, former representative 2-1. This goes back to Senator Campion. He brought up the H511, as well as Representative James brought this up. And I've been reading it while we've been listening and stuff. And there was a comment said that we're lifting the restrictions on buildings so that we can get some more housing and everything. So I read the bill, and I was curious to know, and this is kind of a two-part question, it shouldn't be too hard. One, what are the restrictions now that I read the bill? And number two, Act 250 is still very active on this bill. I mean, you still have to go through Act 250 to make this happen. So I'm just kind of curious what the restrictions are being eased up on. And when it said line 12, page 12, that the district commissions are still involved in this. And we all know that district commissions are not the same. So I'm just kind of curious how this bill is going to actually play out.
And I know Senator Campion did have to hop off and on to a new meeting at 9 o'clock. So
what about Representative James?
But Representative James, and also if anybody else wants to weigh in on Chris's question too.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Chris. That's a really great question. So I guess first I would address the question of Act 250 governance. That is something that, and I wish Seth were here to speak to this more directly, because he's got a lot of years of experience with Act 250 and has been working on a bill that's going to be coming out of his committee, a separate bill different from H511 that is going to look to streamline and reform Act 250 governance. And I haven't had a chance to take a look at that bill, so I apologize, Chris, that I can't answer that part of it directly. But we've got a separate bill tracking along that's going to try to make Act 250 basically more user-friendly. In terms of H511, again, this bill is coming out of Seth's committee, but it's trying to target our designated downtowns and our designated neighborhood development areas, and make sure that priority housing projects that communities may propose in those areas have the support they need to move forward more easily. So I can get back to you on the technical details. I'd be happy to send you info, but I know from your previous work on the Natural Resources Committee, Chris, that this is an area you're really familiar with. So glad you're taking a look at the bill. I know that it basically would try to give towns the ability to lift some of the Act 250 restrictions that are currently on those neighborhoods, specifically for priority housing projects. So if you want to build housing in a designated downtown or a designated neighborhood area, some of the Act 250 restrictions would be lifted. And I can get back to you with a specific list of those.
So I did find the one, and the one that stuck out was line 3, page 12. No permit or permit amendment is required for a priority housing project in a designated center, which is the only restriction that I really found in this bill. So I was curious, the word restriction versus restriction, and it's a big restriction. So I get it, and I appreciate that. So
yeah, and I think that's the heart of it. It would exempt these projects in these. It would exempt these projects in these specific areas from Act 250 if they can prove that they've met others important zoning and stormwater and flood stuff.
Exactly.
Basically.
I'm just kind of concerned that Act 250 still has its clause into it, where it comes down to the district commissions, where I know that our Southern District Commission is not really equal to the northern part of the state. So, and for what it's worth, I do study Act 250 pretty regularly now. So I'm really versed in it, and I'm glad I did it. And I'm glad I did what I did, for our state. So thank you very much. I appreciate your answer.
Yeah, and I'd recommend, Chris, that if you really want to dig into this, reach out to Seth, because they've been taking testimony in his committee, and he's got an expertise in Act 250 that frankly I don't have. So
I will do that. Thank you very much for your time.
You bet.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Chris. All right. Other questions for our Senator Lori Hurley?
Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Lori Hurley. I'm a principal broker of Four Corner Properties, which is right on Main Street in Bennington, as well as a local beekeeper here in Bennington. I do want to thank all of you senators and representatives. I had a very long list of concerns, and you guys checked off all the boxes that you guys are somehow collectively on it. And that's such a relief. Thank you very much. So my question is, where do I start on something that is kind of dear to my heart? So being in real estate, I see a lot of commercial buildings, actually right here on Main Street or just on the outer skirts, that had at one point been filled with they're commercial buildings. They had offices, individual offices, or businesses that didn't make it through COVID. So they're empty. And so there's so much space that I see could be converted into residential, but when I talk with the building owners, they're unable to afford it. So I'm kind of looking for somebody that I could reach out to and find out, is there any money available, or is there something you guys can do to possibly put some of this money aside that these building owners can tap into in order to take some of this empty commercial space, not necessarily on the first floor. A lot of times they're on the second floor or third floor. And then on that same vein, some of these buildings have, they've not been taken care of. So they're going to need to do, some of the work on some of the bones of the buildings.
Great, thank you, Lori. Representative Whitman?
Thanks, Matt, and thank you, Lori, for the question. I do. I'll just offer up one thing as a resource, somebody who I think would know much more than me on this, and I don't know if you've checked in with them yet, but the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board is definitely somebody to reach out to. They may be dealing with sometimes larger scale, but the reason I wanted to just bring this up is because I know that specifically they helped with a project to take commercial space in, it may have been Rutland, and transition it into a permanent housing, specifically transitional housing for people leaving emergency housing, people leaving homelessness. And they actually had a great kind of setup where one of the central spaces was kind of the support space, and spaces around it were kinds of individual apartments and things like that. So that's one. Other people on the call might have ideas of other resources, but I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you.
Just that it might be worth it to reach out to the Vermont Chamber of Commerce. Betsy Bishop there has been working, I believe, this year on a proposal to convert commercial buildings to housing.
Thank you. And I also see Senator Sears, your hand is up as well.
Yeah, I think the right person, one of the people to go to, all the suggestions from Dane and Kathleen are great. I would go to Josh Hanford, who's the commissioner of the Department of Housing and Conservation. And Josh is actually, the email is fairly simple. It's just Josh, JOSH Hanford, HANFORD @vermont.gov. And just, happy to have you copy myself or any of the other representatives on the question and some of the properties you're looking at. They're really the Department of State Government that gets involved in these projects, and we give them a lot of money lately, so that might be something they'd be interested in.
Thank you, guys.
Great. I had Denise's hand up before. So Denise, if you have a question.
Yes, good morning. This is less of a question and more of a, I'd like everybody to keep this in the back of their heads, because as I listen to everybody talk, the ability to have more funding available is an awesome thing. And I see people working on programs that are long-term benefits. We're not going to see the short-term benefit. We're going to see the long-term benefit. And that's really important. So I applaud all of that. One of the other things, and I've recently spoken to Representative Morrissey about some of the state buildings, and one of the buildings that's of particular interest to me is the Vermont Building at the Big E. And people think of that as a place where just the vendors who go there, they make money. And that's certainly important. But the biggest goal of that is to represent our state and to bring, expose people to not only coming here as tourists, but to come here to live, because there's millions of visitors that come through there, and some are looking for a change of pace, and they see what Vermont has to offer. They can talk to people from Vermont, and it brings them, piques their interest. And that building is in desperate need of repairs. There's some structural issues, some electrical issues. And so I'm hoping that, I know that the Department of Agriculture has reached out to increase the money given to them to do some major repairs. So when that comes up for votes anywhere, I just encourage everybody to support that and other Vermont buildings throughout the state that really need some TLC.
Great, thank you, Denise. And we should mention Denise from the Chocolate Shop and Village Peddler, of course, a staple down there at the Big E. And I see Representative Nigro's hand up, and I can imagine some of the comments Mike is going to make, but Mike is also a great vendor down there with his wife.
Yeah, just a note. Yeah, as you say, I agree, Denise. It's a really special building. It's a really special event, and I think it is important beyond the businesses that are there. I think it's important for Vermont and Vermont marketing and branding. And obviously, Mary's very aware of this, but I've certainly been talking to a lot of other folks on institutions already. So I'm adding my voice to yours with the folks on institutions.
Well, and this is Mary. We're doing our markup on our capital bill and should be ready within the next week and a half or so after we get back from town meeting. But that is a piece that, as Denise has said and Michael has just said, this represents Vermont to a large number of folks from around not only the New England area, but around the country that come to this expo every year. And so we started last year with some improvements, but this needs major, improvements, and we are looking to provide or put a plan in place to have that happen. So, I will keep the focus on that because we have wonderful folks between Mike and Sarah and the Monty family from the Village Chocolate Shop. We certainly have wonderful representation from the Bennington County area. So it will stay focused. We will stay very focused on that.
Yeah, and I'll add to the coattails of that because we've talked about, those people eventually come up. I talked to your mom and dad, Denise, about the return on that investment for people continuing to shop with you throughout the year and especially during the holidays. So it leads to more people shopping at our shops, but also people living in Vermont. So I'll put our plug in as the Chamber of Commerce. I know there's a pretty large amount of money coming through for retention and recruitment efforts. I think a little bit through the Vermont Department of Tourism, if not the Economic Office, to support efforts like Stay to Stay, which we've been a part of for the last 4 or 5 years, bringing over dozens of families here and at least introducing a lot of people to Bennington County, all the way to the back end of that, which is the Welcome Wagon, the Vermont Welcome Wagon project. Once they do move here, how do we connect them with friends to stay here? So, as a Chamber of Commerce, it's been intimately involved in that and working with retention recruitment efforts all over the place. I know Governor Scott has a pretty good amount of change in his budget to support that across the partners, so throughout Vermont. And we, always love that support. We've been doing it kind of on our own dime, really. The last couple of years, I think the people that have hosted Stay to Stay programs have donated. A lot of people we've been able to use our membership to donate their property or donate food. But that'd be an amazing program to supercharge with some monies as well. So I'll put our plug in, especially as we want to attract great new families to our communities too. Other questions? And we're coming up on the 9:30 hour, so we do want to get you out of here by 9:30. But any last questions for any of our representatives? Like I said, when we'll take a temperature gauge of where we're at the end of the session. If our membership wants to do one last call with our legislators before then, around the May time, we'll do that. Or oftentimes we do get back together in the fall, sometimes with the Vermont Chamber and Betsy Bishop, sometimes not, and try and get everybody geared up for the session that's going to start. So any final questions? All right, well, not seeing any, I want to thank everybody for hopping on this early morning, this Monday early morning. I know that we will have a recording of this. I know that we see Sue Allen on the call from the Bennington Banner. I'm sure we'll have a great story in there as well. And of course, if you go to our website, all these senators and representatives are approachable. But if you're struggling to find their email or wanting to find what committee they're in or what bill they were talking about, that's all on our website over at our advocacy page. And so, make sure you follow up with them if you do have questions. And again, thank you for joining our Chamber of Commerce mid-session update today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.